The African Capacity Development Foundation, Professor Emmanuel Ndozie, has just concluded a 3-day official visit to Kenya. In those 3 days, he has met with senior government officials, partners and representatives of ACBF-supported institutes in the East African country. ACBF aims at building sustainable human and institutional capacity for sustainable growth, poverty reduction and economic transformation in Africa. Being the host of many international organizations with regional focus, Kenya is among the highest recipients of ACBF grants and has so far received $43.4 million. Now, Professor Emmanuel Ndozie, the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, now joins us in studio for further discussion on this. Prof, thank you for joining us. You've been in the country for 3 days and you've managed to meet with top policy makers. What was the thrust of the discussions you had with them?
Well, I was able to meet the Minister of Finance as the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, as well as the Central Bank Governor and other high-ranking officials. I was also able to meet with the leadership of the African Economic Research Consortium, ARC, and KIPRA, which is the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research, as well as other important people. And the most important thing was for me to see for myself, you know, the impact of the projects that we have in Kenya on the capacity development agenda of Kenya and how that can help to improve the economic and social conditions in the country. And I was also able to discuss further on the initiatives the government is taking both at the national and the sub-national levels, and to see how best that we can work again with the Kenyan government to support capacity development in Kenya.
Now, Kenya's middle-term plan is that the country attains an overall GDP growth rate of 10% by 2017, and that's just in 3 years. The country, however, is grappling with challenges such as insecurity. We've got the Al-Shabaab threat, we have drought, we have a high recurrent budget. So how is it going to achieve this?
Well, you know, if you're a development activist and expert like me, it's very important for you to recognize that the most important thing in development is to understand that we have to bring about development in spite of all the challenges. We cannot say that we have to wait until we have an ideal situation, because that doesn't exist anywhere. So regardless of all these challenges that you're facing, I think Kenyan economy has done pretty well. And there's room for it to even do better than it's doing if some of the policy issues are handled and some of the issues that you mentioned. But the country has to continue on the path that it is doing to, first of all, design the right kinds of policies to tackle these specific issues you mentioned, including macroeconomic policies. But secondly, also to ensure that these policies are fully implemented, and then monitor what is going on, and in order to learn the lessons and try to improve upon it. But more importantly, making sure that you have the capacity to, to really deliver on what is going on. And this capacity development is not just in the public sector; it is also in the private sector as well.
Right.
Because for you to bring about structural transformation or manufacturing and create millions of jobs for the young Kenyans, you really need to improve their skills so that they become employable, and you need to strengthen the business environment so that the businesses can also thrive.
And speaking of policies, Africa has suffered brain drain. But now, though, we're hearing talk of reverse brain drain, more Africans coming back to the continent to get involved with the Africa Rising story. But does the continent have sufficient policies to attract these brains and keep them here?
Unfortunately, the answer is no, and that is really regrettable. Many countries in the world have embarked upon this kind of policy that's oriented towards either deliberately exporting your brain and re-importing them back, or tapping into your diaspora that's already out there so that they can bring back their intellectual and financial capital and resources to help to develop the countries. You can start from Japan to China recently, and India. I mean, they've been doing that. All the revolutions are seen in the technical and IT areas, but mostly because the Chinese government, for example, had a policy that was deliberate to really attract thousands of best Chinese brains that they have out there to help them to launch into any sector that they wanted to dominate. And so I'm encouraging African governments to do the same, because you see all kinds of issues that result from that. The governments spend a lot of money building this capacity, only to export it to the countries where they are even least needed. Part of the problem you see happening in the Ebola crisis today, it's not because Liberia doesn't have doctors, but the majority of them are in the United States. They have, thousands and thousands of nurses in the United States who could be contributing to the, healthcare delivery in Liberia. But the same thing goes along when you think about other areas. But the most important thing is when you lose your capacity, when there's a brain drain, it doesn't necessarily need to be a complete loss to the country.
Right.
As long as you have a strategy for either recirculating the brain or making sure that you recover them or make them return. But you need a strategy and set the conditions that will be appropriate for that. And ACBF is in the process of helping some countries, such as Ghana, to establish some strategies for really attracting back this brain that has been lost elsewhere.
Well, you've brought up the issue of Ebola, so let's talk a little bit about that crisis.
Yes.
We've heard from the IMF that they are considering debt relief for the 3 countries, which is obviously good news in order to help these battered economies. But what is your organization doing, or how else is your organization helping these economies?
No, first of all, I think the most important thing that was needed when the crisis broke was to express an unwavering, spirit of solidarity. And I personally wrote to the leadership of these countries to say that we're all, standing with you when Liberia or Sierra Leone or Guinea suffers, the rest of the continent suffers. And so that's number one. Number two is we immediately mobilize our network of think tanks to begin to reflect on, why did this disease spread in those countries, and why were countries like Nigeria and Senegal were able to contain it. Are there lessons for those countries who are at risk? And in other words, what can be done in addition to what are the impacts? Because often people just simply look at it as a disease or medical issue, but it is more, more than that. It has significant social and economic consequences for the countries, and therefore we wanted to understand this very well, which will help the response that everybody else is giving. And then in the course of doing this, we found out that often the coordination capacity is very weak. The capacity for mobilization and information sharing among the communities, at least grassroots level, was also a challenge. So that people actually know exactly what to do and how to address the challenge. And so we have joined forces with other organizations, the UN and then the African Union Commission, to see how we can support these countries now. But for ACBF, our work will actually begin once Ebola is over, because we have to rebuild the capacity that has been lost, or that really wasn't there, which meant the disease to become such a pandemic. And we're talking about public health systems, and we're also talking about the issues I mentioned that will enable the public service to be able to respond effectively to such kinds of things. So we will first of all conduct some capacity needs assessment in these 3 countries, so that we know what we're dealing with. And this will enable every supporter, every practitioner to come in and see how they can support those 3 countries. All
right, Prof. Thank you very much for talking to us here on Global Business. We had in studio Professor Emmanuel Dozier, the Executive Secretary of this African Capacity Building Foundation. Well, it's been